Hey, it's Ethan. And before we get to the show, I just want to talk to you about your tiny house plans for 2022. If you're trying to do a tiny house this year, like really trying to do it, it's not all glossy photos and Instagram posts. The actual work of planning and building a tiny house is gritty, slow, and frustrating. And I know this because I built my own tiny house back in 2012, and I went over budget by about $15,000, and it took a year longer than I was expecting. Back when I built, there weren't many resources available. I was pretty much alone. There were no other tiny house builders around that I could ask questions to. There were no YouTube channels giving tours and showing how to install various tiny house appliances. And in terms of design, I didn't have many houses to see to inspire me. Figuring out how all the systems work together was a major headache, and I still live with some of the mistakes I made in my tiny house. So what I'm here to tell you is that you don't have to do this alone. I created an online community called Tiny House Engage with the exact purpose of connecting you with other tiny housers at every step in the process. The result is that you can build your house faster. You can learn from and be inspired by your peers who are already living tiny, and you can celebrate your successes and milestones and learn from other people's challenges and mistakes. If you've gotten to the point where you are serious about pursuing this lifestyle, even if you haven't drawn a single floor plan and you don't know what a heat pump is, that's okay. Tiny House Engage is for you. Registration is open this week only. So it opened on Tuesday, February 8th, and it goes through Tuesday, February 15th, and that is it for the month of February. You can learn more over at thetinyhouse.net/engage. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/engage, ENGAGE. And it doesn't matter if you've just started or you haven't even started at all. If you know you want to live tiny, then Tiny House Engage is the most supportive community to help you along on that journey. So join us today over at thetinyhouse.net/engage. I can't wait to see you in the community.
I also don't feel like this should be like a high pressured lifestyle. Like some people are like, but I have less things than you. And I'm like, you probably do. I don't know. I've never counted. Some things are part of those unofficial rules of minimalism that have made it into mainstream.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and my guest this week is Christine Platt. I'm really excited to share this conversation because Christine Platt approaches the concept of minimalism from a different lens. She is really focused on the why of, why we are attached to the things that we have, why we consume and get them in the first place. And that really helps to find the path to living more as a minimalist. It's a really lovely conversation, and I think that there is a lot of both practical tips in here for someone who is maybe struggling to downsize before living in a tiny house, but also more philosophical thinking about the why behind minimalism. I hope you stick around. I want to tell you about something that I think will be super helpful as you plan, design, and build your tiny house. Tiny House Decisions is the guide that I wish I had when I was building my tiny house. It comes in 3 different packages to help you on your unique tiny house journey. And if you're struggling to just figure out the systems for your tiny house, like how you're going to heat it, how you're going to plumb it, what construction technique are you going to use, like SIPs or stick framing or steel framing, Tiny House Decisions will take you through all these processes systematically and help you come up with a design that works for you. Right now, I'm offering 20% off any package of Tiny House Decisions. For listeners of the show, you can head over to thetinyhouse.net/THD to learn more and use the coupon code TINY at checkout for 20% off any package. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/THD and use the coupon code TINY for 20% off. All right, I am here with Christine Platt. Christine Platt is a modern-day Renaissance woman. From serving as an advocate for policy reform to using the power of storytelling as a tool for change, Christine's work reflects her practice of living with intention. She holds a BA in African Studies, an MA in African American Studies, and a JD in General Law. Christine has written over 24 literary works for people of all ages. When she's not writing, Christine spends her time curating the Afro Minimalist, a creative platform chronicling her journey to minimalism. Christine Platt, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. I was hoping we can just start with, can you kind of tell your story of becoming a minimalist, or your path to kind of finding yourself, calling yourself a minimalist?
Yeah, and then not calling myself a minimalist.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think my journey started the way most people's journeys start, right? Like I just had an abundance of stuff. I felt like I was always cleaning. I felt like I was always organizing. And I was just like, I have got to do something about this. And I think what ended up challenging me about the journey was like, I thought it was all about decluttering. And as we come to find out, it's so much more than our things. And so I had to really start addressing just some, habits that I had, spending habits, behaviors, right? The way that I thought about different things and approached consumerism. And that's what sort of like started my journey. So I started, thinking I was just going to get my stuff organized. And then it turned into a true lifestyle transformation for me. And so, yeah, that's how I got started.
Awesome. So you, what I've really found different about, and refreshingly different about your work and your writings on minimalism, is that you kind of call out the fact that mainstream minimalism has a real focus on aesthetic.
Yeah.
And you certainly aesthetics are important, but that's not your main focus. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to, I think, the same reason so many people are initially drawn to the lifestyle. We see all these images on Pinterest and, Instagram and in all these different places of these beautiful, serene, barren spaces. And we sort of want that for ourselves. And then a lot of people like myself come to find out that, like, oh, turns out I actually do need more than one fork, one knife, and one spoon. Actually, I shouldn't have a lot of white furnishings because I'm super messy, right? Like,
Right.
you start to realize that, the aesthetics of minimalism for so long, I feel, have been at the forefront of this movement when it's really about authenticity. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
every minimalist I know, even if they call themselves that or not, every tiny home dweller that I know, right? Like, all of our spaces look so different. All of us, have different things that spark joy, if you want to say that.
Right.
But it's like, yeah, and so I feel that unfortunately, because the aesthetics of minimalism have made up more of the conversation than actually the practice of it.
Yeah.
I just felt like a need to sort of address that, because, while it tends to have a lot of us become curious in this lifestyle, I feel like it also detracts from a lot of people thinking about embracing, a tinier lifestyle, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, some people look at the images and they're like, oh my goodness, I would love to, have my space look like that. And there are other people that are like, there's no way that I could live like that, right? And I think what we all know is that all of our lives, tiny or not, are going to look very, very different, right? And so I just wish that folks had, and I feel like the conversation's starting to change, right? But I wish that there was more conversation and information around the practice of living with less than aesthetically what it looked like.
Yeah, and it almost seems like there's a lot of focus on the path to get to less, like the Marie Kondos of the world, the organizers, the clutter busting. It's like
Hmm.
all about getting rid of this
Yeah.
excess stuff, which, yes, most of us probably need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you're making a great point that once you get there, there's actually a mindset
Yeah.
shift that happens, or that if it doesn't happen, you end up just backsliding.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think, that's why I started my book the way I did, which is like, let's first talk about the psychology of ownership,
Yeah.
right? Because you can jump in and let go of stuff and find what sparks joy and let go of what doesn't, right? But if you don't really get into the psychology of why you spend the way you do, why you have attachments to certain things, yeah, you're right. I mean, you just end up backsliding, or you hear people say like, "Oh, I tried to be a minimalist and I just couldn't do it," right? And I'm
Yeah.
always like, "Oh, it's usually either rooted in that not doing the inner work to understand the psychology behind their ownership,
Hmm.
or they were more focused on the aesthetics part of it and discovered they didn't really like the way it looked, right?" And so I like to challenge people who say like, "Oh, I tried, I don't think I could do it," and I'm like, why don't you just try not to be a minimalist? Just try to be like a more mindful consumer, try and be a little more intentional
Yeah.
about what you buy and allow and accept into your space. And, because that's really what we're asking, right? We're not really asking everyone to be a minimalist. At least I'm not.
Yeah. And I think that just even the term minimalism has a bit of some preconceptions out there. You know,
Hmm.
this almost race to the bottom of like, okay, I only have, I have 5 black turtlenecks, and so that my outfit is super simple and I can just wear the same thing every day and I don't have to make decisions, and,
Right.
one coffee mug, one fork, kind of what you alluded to before.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, it's not a very realistic lifestyle, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, I do have friends who are what I like to call extreme minimalist, right? And like that is the lifestyle that works for them.
Hmm.
And, most of them don't have kids. They don't have some of the same responsibilities that other folks have, right? And so, like, trying to mirror your life after someone else's who has like is completely different from you in every sense of the word, it's almost like setting yourself up to be
Yeah,
super disappointed.
absolutely. So it sounds like you're saying that you have to find your own path through this. You can't just
Absolutely. I
follow
always
someone else's.
That's my big thing, man. I'm always like, this is minimalism, but your way, right? It's like
Yeah.
why I say you have to choose authenticity over aesthetics, right? If you are authentic and genuine about what you like, what you want, how you feel about certain things, right? Aesthetically, that may look very, very different than what you're seeing in mainstream minimalism, right? And so, you have to just, be authentic and
Hmm.
do it your way. That's the only way it's really gonna work, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you definitely get at this in your writing, which is, what the benefits of minimalism are, just beyond, okay, I have this really neat, tidy space that only has like 2 pieces of
Mhm.
art that I really love in it. You know, can you talk about some of the benefits that you see kind of beyond just the aesthetic and beyond just
Oh
that
my
space?
goodness. Yeah, I mean, the aesthetic part, the and not let's be clear, not having a lot to clean is a huge benefit, right? So, aesthetically, you're definitely going to see some things, but I think the biggest thing for me is, like, I learned that I you can't just be intentional with what you own and what you have in your living space. Like the
Hmm.
lifestyle for me taught me to be intentional about everything, right? Because once I saw how good it felt to, only have the clothing that I really, really, wear and love, to only have things in my space that, make me feel this certain way or evoke these memories or part of my life. I wanted to be intentional with every area of my life. And so, one of the biggest benefits for me was it taught me what it meant to live with intention, right? Of course,
Hmm.
I saw benefits financially, right? Because I was more mindful about what I was consuming and bringing into my home. I think it also teaches your loved ones a lot about who you are and what brings you joy. And it causes them to be more intentional as well about what they offer to welcome into your life. Yeah, it's just I have so much more, like, time that I used to spend cleaning, I can create, yeah, the benefits for me are endless because I really do believe, it's ultimately like a lesson in self-mastery in a way, right?
Sure.
And so, yeah, and I think that's also what bothers me about the aesthetics piece, right? Because I'm
Hmm.
like, man, so many more people could be experiencing these benefits, but unfortunately, maybe the images that they've seen or, some of the documentaries or books that they've read or whatever, that image that word minimalism evokes or the images that are shown,
Hmm.
has caused them not to want to pursue this lifestyle. For me, that's just very, you know, upsetting because I do think it's the lifestyle that can benefit so many people that it's accessible to more people than we've been led to believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Are there particular people, or just is there some low hanging fruit here that we can all kind of become minimalists without really even realizing it in just one small area of our lives?
Ironically, a lot of people are, and they don't even know it, right? It's funny
Okay.
when I ask people to like go through their closet, right? And to, I'm like, you probably already have a capsule wardrobe. You just don't even
Hmm.
know it because it's stuffed in between all those other things. But it's like we naturally gravitate towards wearing some of the same things.
Yeah.
We naturally gravitate towards using some of the same coffee mugs and plates, right? It's just
Yep. Yep.
oftentimes we can't really see those things that really we need, use, and love because they are unfortunately around so many other things that we don't.
Yeah.
For the person who is just like, I don't know where to start, but I have to start somewhere. I mean, I always say, like, start with your spice cabinet,
Hmm. Okay.
right? And go in there and find like all the old lumped together spices and work through there, right? I mean, there are a lot of different approaches that people can take.
Yeah.
And so, I think if you're feeling super overwhelmed and intimidated, starting with something small like your spice closet, and because those are things that you really don't have deep attachments to.
Yeah.
And some folks, I encourage them to like start big and tackle that area that has been just challenging you for so long. Either way, the end result is the same, which is once you're on the other side and you have seen the benefits of how it feels having an organized spice cabinet or having, that room finally tackled, it just encourages you and motivates you to want to move forward and do
To move
more.
forward and do more,
Hmm.
kind of snowballs.
Yeah.
How something that you said a little earlier made me think about, and I'm not a Buddhist, but I have some friends who are, and I've heard them
Uh,
talk about how, like, in Buddhism, you're trying to not have any cravings or any aversions. And
mm,
something that you mentioned about clothes, for example, is just like, you don't want to, I guess I'm not really sure what my question is totally, but it's like, I'm sure you still see clothes and see something that you like really want. Um,
yeah, all the
can you,
time.
like, how? Yeah, I mean, I do. I love clothes. I enjoy buying clothes.
Yeah.
Guilty. Um, so like, how do you? Can you kind of walk through what your process is? Like, almost like, do you talk yourself
If
through
I'm like
like
in the
deciding whether you
store,
want
what am I
this?
doing?
Do you get rid of something? Like, how do you approach that?
I also don't feel like this should be like a high pressured lifestyle. So I'm not
Sure.
one of those people that like count, like some people are
Yeah.
like, but I have less things than you. And I'm like, you probably do. I don't know. I've never counted.
Yeah.
Um, again, I feel like some things are part of those unofficial rules of minimalism that have
Yeah.
made it into mainstream, media. For me, like obviously you're going to be tempted all the time. There are ads in our phones. There are, when you're
So
out and
much
you see certain things,
advertising.
so many ads, right? And so to help with the ads, one of the things that I do is I don't have my credit card information stored. Uh,
Ah.
yes. So it's funny. What I like to do is have sort of something in place that makes me pause. So I'll tell you the pause for the online and then I'll tell you the pause for the in person. So online, knowing that we're going to be tempted by ads and certain things, right? I try to not have my credit card information stored in the phone because the pause for me there is having to get up and get my wallet. And I'm like, do
Hmm.
I really want this? Right. It's just something that we need almost like a little buffer,
Yeah.
right? To just pause because everything is so quick and easy. And then when I go to the stores, when I'm in person, I like to have different mantras that I use, right? So
Hmm.
if I'm at the sale rack, I'll tell myself it's not a deal if you don't need it, right?
Yeah.
Or if I see myself like getting ready, I'm like, "Ooh, I really, really want this." And I like, and that's the thing, you can talk yourself into anything, so you have to have to have mantras that work for you. Uh,
Yeah.
and so another one that works for me is what's the why behind the buy. So I'll say,
Hmm.
"All right, Christine, what's the why? But why are you really buying this?" Right?
Mm.
Just something that makes me pause to think about what I'm about to do. And that
Yeah.
pause, those 2 seconds, I have found to have been so powerful in keeping me, from getting things. I also try and just, be super intentional about the stores that I do go to, right? And so, some stores are more tempting
Yeah.
than others. And so, like, if I just need, say, for example, I don't know, toilet tissue, I'm not going to go to Target just to get toilet tissue because the temptations
Oh my gosh.
to just get to the toilet paper aisle, right? And so, yeah, I think, just again, it just all goes back to just being more mindful. So I'm very mindful about what I have on my phone,
Hmm.
what information I have saved. I'm very mindful about what stores I go to, and arming myself with those with those mantras to kind of keep me in check. I've found it to be super helpful.
Those are all awesome ideas, and I appreciate that, especially the
Yeah.
as you were talking about like tempting stores. I was just thinking like how I am incapable of going to Costco just for what I went for, just like incapable.
Costco's another danger zone for
It's
me.
such a
Yeah.
danger zone.
I'm like, I do need 3 pounds of pickles. I could
Yeah,
make, yeah, like I can
those
just,
pickles
I'll
are
just,
so good.
oh, good. So
Uh,
yeah, because we can justify so many things if we really want it. Like I've found, trying not to put myself in temptation's way, and then when knowing that I'm going to be tempted to just have some things in mind. So a lot of self-talk, I think, that comes into this.
yeah, yeah. So, looking at the minimalism space as a whole and like what you see on social media, it from a glance looks very wealthy and white. Both, and you've made this point of both like in the actual physical items and
Right.
walls and furniture and all these things, but also just the people who
The
are
people, yeah.
kind of doing it. Um, and so your book is called The Afro Minimalist.
Yeah.
What is an Afro
Afro
Minimalist?
Yeah, the Afro Minimalist Guide to Living with Less. Honestly, it's just a moniker that I gave myself
Uh,
when I decided that my minimalist space, I was going to have to do it my way.
mhm.
And because I have a background in African and African American studies, and that's a big part of my life's work, I decided to call myself the Afro Minimalist,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So really, Afro Minimalism for me is just a minimalist life influenced by the African diaspora. But it's a lifestyle that anyone can can adapt if they want to, right? But I think it goes back to doing minimalism your own way. So there have been
Yeah.
other folks who, other Black folks who are like, I love this aesthetic and this is what I want. I'm like, go for it, right? And ironically, the in general, the wellness space, lifestyle and wellness spaces are just super white in
Mhm.
general, right? No matter whether you're talking about minimalism or clean beauty, right? I mean, there have just been, I think, historically some barriers to entry for Black and Brown folks. But I have a lot of a lot of the white minimalist practitioners, that you're referencing. Are dear friends and have welcomed me into this community and really gave me a platform to share my piece. But this is before the book and before it became
Yeah.
a thing like it is right now. And there are a lot of BIPOC people in this space, right? Diversify Van Life
Yep.
is, a really great Instagram page to follow to see Black and Brown folks who live on the road. There are more Black folks in the tiny home communities these days, and so I think our visibility is growing, but I think as a whole, like maybe we're like 1% of what would be considered like minimalist tiny house lifestyle
Right.
folks. And again, what we discussed earlier, I think it's very unfortunate because those images, again, like they just give this appearance, like you said, that it's just like white folks who are wealthy, who can afford to throw away a table,
Yeah.
who can afford to say things like, I just got rid of everything and started, right? And most people
Right.
are like, wait, what?
Right.
Right?
Or like, if I ever need this again, I'll just buy it. Like,
Yeah, I'll just buy another one, right?
yeah.
And so I think, the more diverse stories that we can share, the more we can show just the different ways that people live with less, and that diversity going beyond race, right? Going also with like disability, right?
Yep.
Going with our cultures and ethnicities, family sizes, right? Like I'm always fascinated to see families in tiny homes, right? And the
Yeah.
ways that they have made the tiny house lifestyle work for them. And so I think that diversity also just goes to showing the many different ways that people live with less in their spaces. I think is probably the one thing that's going to combat that mainstream narrative that we've been shown so many
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. And it is something of a paradox, because this is also an issue in the tiny house movement, that representation of Black and brown people is not, it's not representative of how many people are actually living tiny.
Yeah,
But, when you look at the space as a Black or a brown person and you don't see yourself represented, you kind of say, is this for me? Do
yeah,
I belong
yeah,
here? Can I
exactly.
do this?
Yeah, exactly. So that visibility is so important. And I love that, my platform has, led so many more BIPOC folks to really consider this as a lifestyle. I've met just so many wonderful people across all races and socioeconomic backgrounds who, our stories can be more similar than we'd all like
Yeah.
to think they are. Like we think our stories are so unique, and then you talk to more people, and they're like, "Yes, this is why I decided to live tiny. This is why," and you're like, "Me too."
Hmm.
Right? And I feel like there's so much that we can all learn from each other. And I think that anyone who has the ability to pursue this lifestyle, like to be intentional, to
Yeah.
be a minimalist or a tiny house dweller by choice and not by circumstance, right? I think we all, have a privilege, the privilege for me to be able to say, this is how I want to live, right? And so, even as someone from a marginalized community, I still am privileged to be able to be in this space and to share how this lifestyle has benefited me.
Nice. Well, one great question that we've gotten from our tiny house engaged community is, this is from someone named Emily. I'm more of a minimalist,
Okay.
and my husband definitely is not. Any tips for keeping me sane when the clutter gets overwhelming?
Oh man, I get so many questions from couples. It's so hard, right?
Yeah.
One
You're a
of
couples counselor also, right?
I'm a couples counselor, yeah. One of my dear friends who is a professional declutterer, she says the way that it works when she's working with a couple is if one partner wants something to stay and the other one doesn't, it actually stays
Yeah.
because one person wants it to stay, right?
Yeah.
And so I like to encourage people, really, Emily has to focus on her own journey. I know that's so hard when you're in space with someone else, but I do, think living your life as minimally as possible, and again, what's the psychology behind your partner, having these things? I think that also helps, right? Is to understand, why is it so hard for you to let go of X, Y, and Z, even though it's broken? Why do you want to have, your old ratty t-shirt from high
Yeah.
school, right? And getting people to understand their motivations around having certain things
Hmm.
and their attachment to certain things also kind of helps with the process of letting go. But I think, a lot of partners are inspired by seeing the transformation in their partners' lives, right? And so, unfortunately, Emily, well, I promise you won't go crazy, but you have to focus on your own journey,
Yeah.
and if there are things that you notice about your partner's journey that you feel may be contributing to his overconsumption, I think it's worthy of a question, right? Ethan, I've shared this story before about my dear friend who, her husband, when he washes dishes, the bubbles are like overflowing out of the sink and it drives her mad. And she's just like, he's wasting dish soap and it's this whole thing. And so one day I just asked her, I was like, have you ever asked him why he uses so much dish soap when he's washing dishes? And she asked him, and he said, I grew up really poor, and I live with my grandma, and we got dish soap from the dollar store. And even then, I was only allowed to use like one or two drops. And he's like, now that I'm older, I just buy the most expensive dish soap that I want and make all the bubbles that I want. Right. So a lot of
Yeah.
times we're holding on to like unfulfilled childhood wants or some things that we've told ourselves. So a lot of it is getting, to the root cause of, why your partner, has an affinity towards certain things.
Yeah. Understand the psychology behind the clutter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like that. That's very helpful advice.
Thanks.
There was something, I think you shared it on your blog, because, I don't live in my tiny house anymore, but I do still live tiny. And so I don't have a lot of space.
Mm-hmm.
And so gifts are always hard. People want to buy you things. And
Mm-hmm.
you kind of talked about almost like a gifting agreement. This is the JD degree coming up with an agreement, which is just, checking
Sign
with,
right here.
yeah, exactly.
No.
Checking with your loved ones. If you purchase something for me that I don't need, use, and love, do you want me to return it to you, or I have your permission to
Yeah.
regift it or to donate it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a written agreement.
I know.
But it is an understanding
Yeah.
that I have, and I think likewise, we talk about how you teach people how to treat you, right? And I think as a big thing, when I went through a lot of my stuff was gifts. A lot of my stuff came from,
Hmm.
my mom, a lot, and I had to just say like, whoa, so even if I stop buying things, if I don't manage what's coming into my home, it can accumulate back up just as fast. And understanding that psychology of ownership piece, the power of touch,
Hmm.
and how once we touch things or accept things into our lives, we feel responsible for it. So it makes it harder for us
Mm.
to let it go. And so I had to say, there are just certain things like if I know I don't want it, like it's not coming into my home. And so you try and tell people, like, hey, only get me gifts that disappear, like incense or soap, or only do this or only do that. And
Yeah.
people are going to do what
Yeah.
they want. Right. And so, I have to say, like, hey, I'm trying to live with less, I'm still over here letting go of certain things, and as beautiful as this is, and as thoughtful as the sentiment is behind it, I know I'm not going to use it. Right. I'm happy
Yeah.
to either regift it for you if it's something that you were looking for a home for, or if you want to take it back and get reimbursed, I'm fine with that too. But I just had to be honest, like it's just a conversation that has to be had, right? And I think that's also rooted in that authenticity piece that we talk about, right? I have to be
Yeah.
authentic and honest and say like, I really, I'm not going to use this. Like, I'm just not, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'd hate for you to waste your money, or I'd hate for it to sit here unused. And I have found that, I mean, no one in my circle um, challenges that. The few people who did early on, like, it only takes like one or two times for you to reject something for them to be like, okay, you're serious, right?
You're
Um,
serious about this.
you're serious. Yeah. And so what I do is I'll sometimes get text messages with pictures of something. Someone will say,
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm at, X, Y, and Z. and look at this amazing Afro minimalist mug, like, do you want this? Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, even that is giving me the freedom to at least choose, right? This idea that I have to accept something because someone got it for me.
Hmm.
I think that's something that we have to work through dismantling it, that it's bad or wrong to refuse it, right? It's bad or wrong to not be honest and to take something in that, for a fact you're never going to use and that it's just going to take up space.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely gotten better with that. Just saying, I really love it or it's really great, but like I don't have a space for it or
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to be able to use it.
Yeah.
I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Tiny House Decisions, my signature guide, and the resource that I wish I had when I was building my tiny house. It starts with the big decisions, which is, should you build a tiny house yourself or with help? Is a pre-built shell a good idea? Is a house on wheels better than on the ground? And what works better for you? Deciding on the overall size, deciding on whether you should use custom plans or pre-made plans, different types of trailers, and more. Then in part 2, we get into the systems. So heat, water, showers, hot water, toilets, electrical, refrigeration, ventilation. And we're only 2/3 of the way through the book at this point. From systems, we go into construction decisions, talking about nails versus screws, SIPs versus stick framed versus advanced framing versus metal framing. We talk about how to construct a subfloor, sheathing, roofing materials, insulation, windows, flooring, kitchen. I know I'm just reading off the table of contents, but I just want to give you a sense of how comprehensive Tiny House Decisions is. It's a total of 170 pages. It contains tons of full color drawings, diagrams, and resources. And it really is the guide that I wish I had when I was building my tiny house. Right now, I'm offering 20% off any package of Tiny House Decisions using the coupon code TINY when you head over to thetinyhouse.net/THD. That's THD for Tiny House Decisions. Again, that's coupon code TINY when you check out at thetinyhouse.net/THD. Speaking of kind of gifting things, one thing that's helped my wife and I a lot in getting rid of things that we've have some attachment to, but are ready to let go of, or things that we feel like have value, is to use the Buy Nothing groups on Facebook.
Oh yeah. Love Buy Nothing groups.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, they're like kind of local and sometimes hyper local Facebook groups for giving away stuff in your neighborhood. You're not allowed to charge money for it. And it feels so much better to get rid of something when like you are giving it to someone that wants it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I love Buy Nothing groups. I think they're great. We are one here locally. Luckily, obviously, I don't have time to be on there sourcing, which is probably a good thing. But I also, it's hard for me to get around to like dropping stuff off or, like meeting up. And so I have a dear friend who is also a member of our local Buy Nothing group who kind of manages all that for me. But yeah, it's been great. It's a great place for books, great place for like kid stuff, anything you can possibly think of. There's usually someone in your community who can use it. Isn't it wild?
I've given away bubble wrap. People have uses for bubble wrap, which I'm happy to have it not go to the landfill.
There's someone who needs everything. And so, I look at Buy Nothing groups and like, I imagine that this is like what our ancestors did, right? What our foremothers and forefathers did, just kind of asked around, went around, hey, so-and-so is moving to a big girl bed. I know you just had a baby. Do you want this crib? Like, I figure, I can't imagine that that's not how our communities worked before.
Yeah.
And I think what's so nice is that and I've heard this from so many people, so I know it's not just me. Like, you actually get to know your neighbors. You actually get to know your neighbors. You actually get to know your community, right? And so, big fan of Buy Nothing groups. And I think they're coming out with an app, so that
I think they already
you don't have to be. Oh, nice, yeah.
But it's not connected to the Facebook group, so at least when I checked out the app for Burlington, it was fairly empty. But I hope it does gain traction because Facebook isn't my favorite place either.
Yeah, I think they've heard a lot of,
Yeah.
folks are like, "Can we do this not on Facebook?" And so
Yeah.
I'm sure that
Yeah.
app will be the new thing.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to something. You spoke really well and just kind of illuminated the topic of like the fact that you have so much pressure to consume, whether it's
Mhm.
advertising or just clever merchandising or sales or just all these things. And that's kind of I see that's like on the intake end of things. Like that's us taking
Mhm.
stuff in. And then it's like really hard to get rid of. Um,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about like a little bit more about the psychology of why it's so difficult to let go of things that we don't need or use anymore? Like, and we know that logically, but yet it's still hard to get rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is, rooted in our attachments.
Mm-hmm.
I think I talk about that a little bit in the book, like why we're motivated to have certain things and then how we become attached to them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, we all have to, those things that are so hard to let go of that we don't really need, use, or love. I think that's when we have to ask ourselves, like, what is my attachment
Yeah.
to this? Like, getting to the root cause of why this is so hard for you to let go, right? Who gave it to you? Is it representative of, some moment in your past or something that's aspirational for you, right? And all the answers always lie in like, why am I so attached to this thing? But we
Yeah.
but we never really go there. We're just like, oh, I can't really give that up, right? And again, it's that why, why,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so much of this process and of this work has been me understanding that it's so much more than my things. Like it's so much deeper than my things. It's not really
Yeah.
about that thing that I can't let go of. It's like the why behind why I can't let go of it, right? People who I spoke to someone the other day who really has a difficult time with their paper clutter.
Mm.
And one of the is we like dug through that and the why, getting to the root cause of like it really boils down to her wanting to make sure that she's never taken advantage of, that she always
Mm.
has proof that if anyone ever comes to her and says like you didn't pay da 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 da, she can dig it up,
Got the
right?
receipts.
And exactly, but it's like I said, so you got to go a little deeper, right? Like where was that first moment that you were taken advantage of that
Mm.
made this a lifelong practice for you, right? Like the idea that you will need a receipt from 5 years ago and won't be able to either go to the retailer or pull it up online or pull up your banking, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
you got to make those connections. And so those things that we really struggle with, those things that are really hard for us, there's a deeper attachment or sentiment or reason behind that. For me, it was I was a bargain shopper. I talk about this all the time. I love sales. I just loved finding a deal, right? Which is
Yeah.
why my mantra now is like, if it's not a deal, if you don't need it.
Yeah.
Um, but that realization came when I was going through my closet and I saw I just kept coming across things that had sales tags on them. Like I had never worn them, clothing, shoes, access. And I was just like,
Yeah.
what is this?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why are you doing this? Why are you so beholden to getting a deal? Right. And you start down this path of like, well, I love, saving money and I love knowing that, it's like, but why do you choose to do this instead of go for a walk? Why do you choose to do this why do you choose to shop instead of getting on your yoga mat?
Yeah.
Right. And it boiled down to the end of the day, Ethan, after I just like drilled down that why, it went back to the joy that I felt in the memories that I had going shopping with my mother on the weekends
Mm.
as a child, right? And doing that all the time as a child. And she was a bargain shopper, right? And so, just there was something for me in reliving, like there was something that it gave me. It brought me joy, right? It brought me, just evoked certain memories to the point where even now, if I go shopping, whether I buy a whole bunch of stuff or I don't, I still like to end the day with an ice cream cone because that's what me and my
Oh,
mom used to do.
that's what you and your mom used to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, when you do this work, like looking through the lenses of, whatever that moment in time was. So for me, looking back on that time and remembering it through my eyes as a child versus as an adult, like as an adult, I can look back and I'm like, she wasn't buying anything. Like we were just walking around the mall and it was fun and she might have got something here or there. But like, hey, we were in South Florida, the AC was free. Who wouldn't be at the
Mhm.
mall
Yeah. Yeah.
every weekend, right? But in my childlike eyes, we were at the mall and so we were shopping. Right. So it's really this,
Yeah.
this self-discovery work, this inner work of really getting to the root causes of your attachment for certain things and your motivations to buy certain things or act a certain way, like and getting to those attachments. Like you have to drill down deep.
Yeah. It's important work to do if you're going to stick with
Hmm.
this or even achieve it in the first place.
For sure.
Nice. Well, one thing that I like to ask all my guests is for book or resource recommendations. Are there any writings or people creating minimalism content that have inspired you that you'd like to share?
I'm a big fan of Courtney Carver. She's a dear friend. I love her book, Project 333, really
Hmm.
helped me get my wardrobe in order. And then I've always been a big fan of Joshua Becker. He has a book coming out this year called Things That Matter. And it's really helping us work through some of the distractions
Yeah.
that we have, as there's so many distractions these days. Atomic Habits is great. I'm currently listening to the audiobook The Courage to Be Disliked. So
Okay.
good.
Ooh.
So yeah, those are I think, some great books. But yeah.
Well, that's wonderful, and I plus one to Joshua, who's been a guest on the show, and Courtney,
Oh,
who
great.
Courtney
Yeah.
published a guest post for me like 10 years ago when I had a different website, and she's just always been so sweet, and I've
It's
had the chance to
amazing.
meet them both
She's
in person.
amazing.
They're both awesome.
Yeah.
Um, and I was going to ask you about capsule wardrobes, but I'm still hoping to have Courtney on the show to talk about
Oh, yes.
the
That is
wardrobe stuff.
her
That
lane.
is her. That's her
She has
zone.
helped me.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I definitely was able to create a capsule wardrobe thanks to following
Mhm.
her uh,
Mhm.
advice. But I think like
Yeah.
Courtney's the one for that.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. Well, Christine Platt, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. I really loved our conversation, and I can't wait to share this.
Same. Thanks so much for having me, Ethan.
Thank you so much to Christine Platt for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes, including a full transcript and links to Christine's book and website at thetinyhouse.net/201. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/201. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. Hey, it's Ethan. Thanks so much for listening to the show. And if you've made it this far, you must really be a fan. If you enjoy this podcast and are currently planning, buying, or building a tiny house, I'd like to invite you to my private online community called Tiny House Engage, where you get unlimited Q&A, support and accountability from your peers, and multiple weekly live events to connect with fellow tiny housers and get your questions answered. You can learn more at thetinyhouse.net/engage. We've got contractors available to answer your plumbing and electrical questions, and weekly video office hours so you can talk through your tiny house challenges and questions and make solid progress. And if you're a fan of the show, Tiny House Engage members get to watch live while I record the interviews for the Tiny House Lifestyle podcast and ask questions of our guests. It's truly the best way to get advice and support on your tiny house journey, and registration only opens once every 4 to 6 weeks. The doors are closing this coming Tuesday, so head on over to thetinyhouse.net/engage to learn more. Again, registration closes on Tuesday, so visit thetinyhouse.net/engage to learn more.